Ed? Or are you on a fisheye lens or something? You look different.
Ed, you're on mute again.
Sorry for that. Yeah, no, must be the angle. I didn't get a haircut that I know of. Sorry.
Long hair's still there. All right. Well, we got the recording going, and I just want to say thanks for everybody joining the call today. Kind of the overall agenda item that we were hoping to do was run through the remainder of the results from the survey and start to talk a little bit about the roadmap that will take over the next 6 months to a year. I think is kind of the planning that we want to do. And, as I was mentioning earlier, we're hoping to have kind of continue these routine bi-weekly meetings for the facility registry community. And then also maybe set up some side meetings for either localized groups that this time zone doesn't work great for, or specific topics that aren't ideal for them or aren't of interest across the community, but just to a focused group of people. So, Ed, before you joined the call, I kind of asked around any kind of initial topics that people were particularly interested in. Jim had a chance to kind of start going through the implementation guide and mentioned that might be helpful to chat a little bit about. Larry's been working on the Sandbox and some of the facility registry things associated with that, but is more interested in just plugging into the community a bit. And Roger had a question just around kind of, the dichotomy between, resource map and DHIS and how particular tools are associated with the facility registry community and kind of the process that we take around trying to promote a, tech agnostic type of requirements gathering approach. And that type of thing. So just wanted to mention those as well as things that we might want to touch on a little bit today. So.
Okay, perfect.
All right, great. Well, maybe I can start a little bit with just some of the remaining survey results, and then we can jump into some of those specific topics that different people mentioned, if that sounds good. So hold on, I had it opened here. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, let me know when you guys can see my screen share.
Got it.
Okay, great. So as we mentioned last week, we did this survey. We kind of ran through, let me go back up to the top here. Okay. So we ran through kind of a number of, topics and things that we'd covered to date. We've made a lot of different progress in different areas. We completed the roadmap survey. We had some pretty good participation from different community members. I believe last week the majority of our conversation focused on these two items in terms of topics that the community was interested in. We talked about the implementation guide and the integration with the facility registry via APIs and kind of how we can support implementers and technologists to do that. Do you guys have any kind of follow-up questions on this, or is it okay if we move on to some of the other survey results? All right.
I just have a question, Scott, which is if we can change the wording of the quarter, because we're not talking about what we're going to do in the first quarter of a year or anything, right?
Oh yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think I had clarified that through the Google group, but yeah, if it's not clear, we weren't talking about kind of fiscal quarters or anything like that, but rather
quartiles.
Quartiles of interest based on the aggregate score of each topic. So.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
That's a relief.
Yeah, so okay, I just wanted to clarify that. But any other follow-up questions, or should we move on to some of the other topics that and kind of their prioritization that we saw? All right, well, I will perhaps move on then.
Yeah, just right here.
Okay, so kind of the second quartile or categorization of topics based on their level of interest were, we titled medium-high level of interest. And a lot of these were around different brown bags of people who are implementing either facility registries or apps that surround a facility registry and provide some kind of localized or specialized service. For example, a lot of people were interested in what's going on in Tanzania with their facility registry implementation. There's been some effort around a master facility list tool that we've been working with PEPFAR on and helping them to standardize facility lists into a master list. And a number of other topics. I'm not necessarily sure how much I want to just kind of categorically go through all these, but I definitely did want to share kind of that this was kind of the second chunk of things that were identified of interest to people. And I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to review or aren't necessarily clear on what some of these topics are, but yeah, I definitely just wanted to communicate these were kind of the second category of interesting topics that people had. Any questions on these, or I don't know, would it be helpful to clarify any of the specific ones here?
I'm fine. I looked at them.
This is Larry. It may be too detailed for now, but the master facility list, would that include like a two-part key or the country as well as facility, or how were you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think a master facility list in, I don't know, the terminology that we're using here would be a country's like master standardized list that would be stored within a facility registry. The facility registry being the tool that helps to store it, allow a venue for people to update and curate that data, as well as to share it, via APIs, for example. So it wouldn't necessarily be like a cross-cutting global master facility list, but it would be just for one particular country. I wasn't particularly clear on the first part of your question though about the two keys. What were you referring to there?
Well, I guess that was it. Whether it's gonna be multi national or just a single country. That was it.
Yeah. Oh, I think Larry, you're asking about the actual keys and identifiers used for specific facilities, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think what it refers to here is basically saying when we go to a country talking about, let's help implement a facility registry. A facility registry is really a service, a system that fulfills a goal, right? And the goal is to have trustworthy, shared data about what the facilities are. And that data itself is the master facility list, and it sits in the facility registry. When countries implement these facility lists, they will typically have one or typically more identifier schemas, right, that are relevant within the country, and that could either be assigned by the ministry, by a combination of the ministry and NGOs, and so on. So the master facility list project doesn't really go into adding another set of keys that are kind of valid internationally for facilities. It's more a project around helping each country improve the governance and processes around the facilities they do have. But one thing to note is that when you do identifiers, each identifier does have a context associated to it, which is like a metadata flag that would say, like, whether that identifier 123, say, is assigned by the MOH of Tanzania, or whether it's assigned by WHO, or whether it's who is the authority and what's the scope in a way. So so a lot of the identifier schemes that we have seen, when adequately added with this metadata, could be used internationally. But that is a bit just a side effect of using the identifier scheme. Sorry, everybody, if I drove into this, but I thought Larry was just coming into the community, so taking a little bit of extra time to answer some questions might help him wrap up.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, cool. I guess one other thing I wanted to kind of mention here was we had one of the topics that we wanted to add into our survey was just around burning issues, and for a while the community has in some ways focused just on whatever were the burning issues of the people who had joined. And I think what we're going to try to do is, set aside specific meetings to have those type of conversations. And, of course, whoever joins will bring their own experience and questions and things like that. But also try to have kind of like specific topics and speakers laid out ahead of time so that people can know what to expect in terms of the community meetings. And then, perhaps at the end of each call, there'll always be a time to talk about, kind of important topics or specific questions or things like that, but at least have a bit of a schedule and a roadmap for the community to move forward, and then also have some set aside times to discuss burning issues and kind of like this is the stuff I'm working on this week that I really, would like a question, my question answered or otherwise addressed. So, all right. Any other kind of questions on these medium high interest ones? Is this kind of run through helpful to everybody, or I'm just curious if it's helpful to talk through these, or if you guys were already pretty familiar with kind of the results from the survey too. Just a quick question.
Yeah. I think, Scott, one thing that might be useful is to start making clear now to everybody on this call, but there's a broader community that's not on this call about what are the implications, right? So there are topics that will be discussed and with more time, right? Or like if they're short, will be given an earlier priority to resolve because they're part of the higher ranking things. And then these are kind of like start to be the towards the 25 to 50% interest area, which means that either they'll be more time boxed, right? Or we'll have to try to control how much time we spend on each one. So this is a good time to actually start thinking about, how do we tackle each one of these topics if it's of interest to you, considering where the broader community ranks it in terms of interest, right? So, for example, if you're super interested about something that appears in the 4th quartile, the best thing might be to set some side meetings or to plan a set of activities that are offline and then present that back to the community during these calls as results, instead of expecting these calls to tackle them as main agenda items. So this is just a way for anybody who actually thought something was interesting to start making that mental image about how it might unfold. And also the list is long, so it might be a bit overwhelming when people are seeing it for the first time and so on. But let's get through it, and then let's talk about implications on how we tackle the first 25%, which is the most important.
Okay, great. All right, so just to move to kind of the third category here, had a number of kind of a mix of technical and general community topics around the API, general MFL strategy, some of the single sign-on work that has been going on in the community, as well as a number of the FRED API or Facility Registry API topics as well, and how do we kind of take that to the next level of improving the API specification and functionality as well. Any general questions on these before I move on to the last quartile?
What is the current thinking on the single sign-on across the whole OpenHIE community?
I guess we can answer that based on the conversations we had in India and subsequent discussions. There's 3 different sort of areas of discussion regarding security and single sign-on. One of them is the implementation of the ATNA OHIE profile, which implies 2 things. It implies that the nodes are authenticated. That's a NA in ATNA. And by authenticated nodes, it just means that computers know which other computers are talking to, which basically means that you have to have certificates deployed, and those certificates have to be appropriately signed, and computers should be able to authenticate each other. So, for example, when a server talks to another server, it does those through either VPN or SSL connections that are using certificates that are appropriately managed. That also, ATNA does not limit it to the data center, but I think that the people who are working on more point-of-care sort of communication are not thinking about ATNA right now as from an OpenMRS instance, let's say, in the field, even though it's possible and it's done. And then the part of ATNA is audit trail, and it's basically a standard to aggregate audit logs that come in a format that I think Jim will be familiar with. Oh, sorry, Larry will be familiar with, and Jim's I'm sure too. That is the syslog format. So basically, it says when you have an audit trail, you have to include most probably these data elements, and they have to come in this format, so you can aggregate them somewhere and see, for example, oh, look, Ed was looking into the shared health record of patients, and he shouldn't be. So that's the ADNA profile is one of the first steps in that the OHIE cares about. Now, notice that it's audit trail and it is a node authentication, but it does not include user authentication. The SSO part also is about user authentication and service account authentication. And the current thinking there is to rely on standards like OpenID and OAuth. And that is exactly what we have done in the resource map implementation of a facility registry. And it actually has derived in a lot of value. For example, in Tanzania, there was a local group doing applications that would help curate the data for the Ministry of Health using their very particular workflows. And using the single sign-on infrastructure, they could write the code that connects to facility registry APIs, gets the data, and updates it based on what the user does without ever having to touch or see or care about a username and password, because that was all managed by the facility registry. They don't even have the UI for logging in. You know, when you go into some tools these days and they say log in with your Google ID or log in with your Facebook, right? And you go to the Facebook or Google infrastructure and then you come back to the tool you were trying to use. Well, it's the same thing, but where the authentication authority now is managed by the Ministry of Health. And it happens to right now reside inside Resource Map because it's not a thing that you will find out in the wild in these tools. But what our hope is that if we can work with OHIE to make this like a common pattern, that we can actually make that authentication authority a shared kind of commons resource, so that all the OHIE tools that have user interaction can say, hey, let's use this as our login, and all the add-on tools that will happen up above, where people have to then interact with OHIE data, can also start using that. And it allows you to share an identity across applications. It allows you to have audit trails where, let's say Larry is in this tool is the same user as Larry XYZ in this other tool, and you can basically have more trustworthy audit trails and so on. So that's the thinking right now. And since this is in the third quartile, maybe we should have some time to either document things offline or call up a side meeting in order to to discuss it. Yeah.
Larry, do you see that as something pertinent for your work with the Sandbox?
Well, Sandbox is always a work in progress, and of course we can't do what it's going to be in December today. So no, I was just curious about, is there general agreement among all the registries and everyone, shared health record and so forth, on how to do the security and authentication and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there was some consensus at the architecture meeting, but there's certainly work that remains in terms of, how will this be implemented more broadly within OHIE, and, some of the specifics there I think have yet to be determined. But, I think our takeaway from the meeting in Indianapolis was there was, a strong interest in trying to incorporate some of this technology into OpenHIE. So, okay, cool. Well, maybe we can keep that kind of on the back burner for the Sandbox work that you're doing, and as it starts to come to fruition, hopefully in OHIE we can revisit it and see how that can get incorporated there.
Yeah, I do have one question for Larry about the Sandbox very quickly. Is it supposed to be there just as a place for kind of end users to play and tinker and see around, or is it also supposed to be like a best practices installation of the thing? So I'm wondering, because with things like the ATNA node authentication, if you're trying to make the Sandbox a best practices sort of environment, you would have certificates deployed on each server and making sure that the communications between services and between the HIM and the services are done with appropriate SSL and VPN connections. But if the purpose of the Sandbox is just for users to kind of tinker and make sure that they're not and just provide them an environment to kick the tires, then you may not need or require to have that deployed.
Well, I think we've explained, but we have two basic sandboxes. One is the demo sandbox, and it has as its rule that it will be refreshed nightly as it was to a current known state, and users from anywhere in the world can play with it, but knowing that at the end of the day it's going to be wiped out and reset to the beginning.
Right.
And obviously this has to be something that runs without error and so forth. And then there's the development sandbox where each registry and ourselves and would come in and try the latest and greatest and get it working, and then actually move it to the demo. So the demo is sort of a snapshot in time of the sandbox, and hopefully, or one of the rules is it should always be working. So anywhere at any time, someone could log onto the site and get a good indication of what OHIE does.
Okay, perfect. That clarifies it.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we wrap up the kind of last quartile that we saw. So these were the last three topics kind of in the bottom rungs of interest, but not to say they're not necessarily important, but perhaps we'll have some side meetings to try to wrap them up. But this was around feedback to CSD and how we continue to improve that standards profile as part of IHE, the ATNA conversation that Ed was just mentioning, and then a review of some of the Rwanda facility registry implementation work too.
I guess that is as much as we will talk about ATNA.
Yep, all the way at the bottom. But some of these things are just they're important, but they're super specialized and maybe don't have as broad of a level of interest among people. So, and that's fine. That's to be expected. So, any kind of last questions, kind of on the priorities, and does this prioritization make sense to you guys in terms of how we start to schedule our future meetings and organize our group?
Yeah, I have some comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Roger.
To me, it does not make sense. It seems to me that there are like 3 separate tracks that have to run through our work. And the lowest, not the lowest, but one level is the implementers level. People who are actually implementing facility lists and registries. How do we help them achieve their goals? Okay. The middle level is more of a technical or developer level, which is like, what tools do we create to help people do that? And maybe there's a certain amount of like protocol development and stuff like that that's in the second layer. And then the third layer is the architecture layer, okay, which is like, what is functionality that we have to offer in a conjuries of systems in order to be useful, and what are the messages that we're sending in? How does it relate to the other OHIE efforts? How do we make them all work together? Okay, and I think that we have to work in all 3 at the same time, all the time. Okay, we can't, just lay one down and do the other. And so we can sort these issues into the different layers, okay, and work on them in parallel rather than working on them in serial.
Roger, it was a little bit breaking up, but I think I understood what you're saying. And I think that is our goal, is to not necessarily do these sequentially, right, like one after the other. But certainly, have a blend of implementation topics, developer or highly technical topics, and then broader architecture topics. But in the terms of like how our group goes about doing them, certainly there's only so many hours per week. We can work on things, but I guess our vision was to try to have, as part of these meetings, a set of focused topics that we can plan out into the future of like, hey, these are the things that our community will focus on through these meetings, and then try to arrange side meetings for things that were, have had more focused interest just among a few people, so that that way we can try to address, the full spectrum of things that are going on, but then also have a mix of, technical implementation and broader architecture topics. So I think that is our goal, and I hope that we can try to, have that blend in our community interactions, whether it's, through these community meetings or other focused kind of side meetings as well. Was there somewhere that you felt like we were kind of like getting off track of achieving that?
Well, yeah, it seemed to me like just looking, if we were to like follow the priorities um, um, in a sort of a simplistic manner, then we'd be working right now to improve implementation. Okay, to provide more documentation, more examples, more help in terms of how to carry out.
Sorry, Roger, to interrupt. Can other people hear Roger well, or is it just me that's really cut off?
It's breaking up a little bit for me too.
It's breaking up a lot for me. Yeah, I didn't understand what Roger said. Sorry.
I can't get much of it.
Roger, would you like us to call in a phone line for you or something?
Yeah, we can do that. You can keep sharing your screen, and we will just do audio over the phone. How about that?
That's fine. I'm at 404-639-6265.
404-639. What were the last four numbers, Roger? Sorry.
You can chat. You can type them in the chat to the right. Otherwise, it's...
Roger, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but if you could give us the last four numbers, we'll need that to call you in. Maybe Roger can't hear us. 1 second. Let me see if I have his phone number somewhere in my contacts. 1 second.
You get 6 digits.
But
you need me to call in?
No, we need the last four numbers of last 4 digits of your phone number. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. 6265.
6265. Okay, 1 second.
Thank you. Sorry,
The recursiveness of trying to get a number for better audio through audio.
6265.
And you might want to mute you, or I want to mute you here.
Okay.
So that you don't get double audio.
That's fine. Super.
Hey, Roger. Great. Yeah, maybe if you could just say
Great.
that last thing that you were mentioning, I'd be interested to hear how how we can align better with what you're saying, because I think that is our goal of wanting a blend of implementation, technical, and architecture type of conversations, and certainly we have to prioritize some things over the other, but also helping to how do we schedule these meetings and have a combination of kind of sidebar meetings to achieve that type of cross-cutting progress on a number of different fronts. I would be open to any kind of suggestions you have for us and how we can best achieve that.
Okay. So are people pretty clear? Is that an echo, or is that, do we need to?
You might need to mute your computer, because if not, you will hear yourself through the Hangout. So just turn down the volume.
There we go. Oops.
That must be painful on your side.
It's my fault. Hold on.
No.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
That's pretty good from us.
Perfect.
Okay, super. So, is my talk about the 3 layers of work understood? Did people hear about that, or do I need to start back on that?
I think I heard it okay, but I wouldn't. Jim and Larry, feel free to speak up if you didn't hear it.
I wouldn't mind a quick recap.
Yeah, I didn't understand it.
Okay. So one layer is implementers, okay, trying to help them succeed in their implementation projects, giving them guidance and helping them overcome difficulties. The second layer is a developer technical sort of layer where we're actually speccing and creating tools that are used for facility registries, testing tools, and maybe also protocol development counts in this sort of a level. Then the top level is the architectural layer, which is how we fit into the whole OHIE community. What is our role and how do we respond to the sort of message-oriented architecture that other people are building, and how does their vision mix with our vision? Excuse me. So basically being responsible members of that collaborative. And it seems to me like if we were to just follow this list in a sort of mechanistic way, partly because of who the audience was who filled it out, and partly because of where things are at, there'd be a strong focus on getting user documentation and more examples and more step-by-step stuff, recommendations of tool and things like that. Whereas at the same time in the OHIE community, there's some sort of seminal discussions going on about, what is the overall messaging architecture and things like that, so that we would really like it. So whatever it is that we do for the individual implementers doesn't start conflicting with our fitting into an overall health information exchange. So we're thinking about both at the same time, and that we're executing on all 3 layers.
Yeah, and Scott, I'll just jump into that for a second. Absolutely, and the goal of the survey is not necessarily to kind of reactively and kind of automatically execute according to the survey weights. It's a way of basically learning what the community members are caring about and planning activities in a way that takes care of what's strategic and makes sure that we're still working on the things that the facility registry in OHIE needs to be doing, but being mindful of the priorities and maybe gaps that were left from the work so far, right? So I agree with you 100%, and we are part of the messaging discussions in OHIE, and we are helping that those architecture discussions happen as well. All the cross-cutting aspects of being part of OHIE are important. There's other standards and profiles that as well have a role in this discussion that we're also having to take care of. And this is just a way of really listening to our community to get data in order to decide. But for example, if working with the appropriate OHIE folks to determine other approaches to do transactional updates to facilities, I don't know, I'm making something up here, comes up as a specific thing for OHIE, it's not like it would be shirked just because it wasn't on this list, right? This is just a way for us to be mindful about different attendance and styles and needs when we're doing our planning. But our planning is driven by the needs of the project. Does that make sense to you as a framework? I think that's what you were trying to recommend as well.
Well, I understand we need to get what our community needs, and that it's really, it's really hardest to get the implementation level people because they have so many responsibilities of their own where they are, to try and get them to think in a community way is sometimes hard. I think that's important, and I'm sure that we're participating in the top level architecture, and that's good also. But and this is sort of what my question was that I wanted to ask about. It's as I understand it, currently our idea of sort of a model facility register or a usable facility register is DHIS2, and that the resource mapper is sort of a data gathering tool for loading stuff into DHIS. It's gathered in a facility.
In which country is that, sorry?
Beg your pardon?
In which country is that? I missed the part where you were saying where that was happening.
Oh, I wasn't saying any country at all in particular.
Oh, okay, because that a particular topology is one that happens in some countries, but it's not a generic topology or one that we're even suggesting is like a destination topology. I thought you were referring to a specific example or set of examples. There's definitely places where it is like that, but there's places where it isn't.
Right. So that's sort of the point, is that it seems if and that's sort of why I put this picture up here. So maybe, I don't know, maybe
we can see it.
Make it big. Oh, you're all seeing it big? Good.
Yeah, if you click to the rest of you, if you click on Roger's name, you will see his screen share larger.
So, at any rate, let me get into it myself so I can see what I'm talking about. At any rate, so this is sort of like my picture of what's sort of like the information space in which we're working, okay, and so at some way it would seem to me that we would want to have a tool that would be able to accomplish the facility registry function, okay, and relate to some of these other systems in different ways, but also would need to relate to other registries that maintain some of these other objects down here. But some of the objects really ought to be maintained within the facility registry system. Okay, so I don't know if people, if it's a goal to develop something like that, or to work with Resource Mapper so it fills this functionality maybe a little better than it does now. Okay, but that's sort of like a number one big question. Are we providing a product, or are we helping people use products as something? And
Yeah. So thanks for bringing the diagram up. I think it's a great backdrop for the discussion. So the role of this community is really to help coalesce the folks that will implement and build products that do this. Resource Map happens to be the reference implementation for a facility registry, and as such is where we have to demonstrate kind of the practices of this data management and so on. When I look at the diagram that you have here, that is exactly kind of like the sort of interaction that we're planning to, and then like the integration with DHIS, for example. We have a facility registry where there's facilities that can refer to each other. They have collections of facility IDs. They have multiple attributes of many types. Some of those attributes are more complex and are probably externally managed, like a geographically hierarchy, like pointers to individuals in an HR system, like a provider registry, identifiers of organizations and other object lists as you have, which are, maybe governed in their own particular way. And this is just, the facility registry just takes a reference to that information, and then exposes all that intersection of information in a way that transactional systems can use it, in a way that data warehouses and analytic systems can use it, the facility list as a dimension, right, in their own data capture, and that mapping through the right IDs, other systems that still have old identifier types can still relate to the data, even though internally it might be identified in new ways. So I think this is a great diagram that shows like the role of the facility registry data amongst kind of other systems, and I think it's a great backdrop. Now, the part of the goal of having the resource map work is to, over time, as we, in a community, clarify the requirements of what we want out of facility registries, to provide kind of like that spearhead implementation of some of those requirements, right? So when you say, for example, hey, there's things that I wanted to do differently, I'd love to have an offline chat with you and say, for each one of these kind of requirements implied in your diagram, what would it look like, and where do things need to change? Because it does represent so far kind of like the intersection of the requirements we have surfaced in this community. So if you're surfacing new requirements, that's super, super valuable, and we want to bring some time. But one thing I suggest, Roger, if you're okay, is to take some time offline, kind of going through this diagram and what is currently there, to maybe help get up to speed on things that maybe some of us get for granted because we have been like sitting in this community for like more than a year. So I really like to use this diagram and help it be the tour guide around those requirements. Would you be okay doing that sometime?
Sure.
Great.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep, perfect. And this diagram is from the CDC and PEPFAR work on clarifying internally what facility registries are, right? I've seen the slide.
Oh, it's just from the presentation, it's from that presentation I sent you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that was just like an internal education piece that I made.
Yeah, okay, I see why it was valuable. Okay.
Okay. Roger, I was just thinking I might send a few of kind of we have like a set of requirements that we've been documenting across different locations and implementations of facility registries. I might share some of that documentation with you as well, just so you can see some of the kind of related work to this type of diagram that we've been doing too, that I think you might find really interesting. So.
Well, that's really good, because that's sort of what I've been doing. I reached the point where I was I commented on about the first half of the implementation guide, and then felt I had to learn about Resource Mapper, and so I spent some time learning about Resource Mapper, and that sort of lit up a bunch of requirements in my mind. And so I'd love to look at your list and see how it sort of matches with my list, and I mean, I don't have to tell you. I mean, like, the whole idea of prioritizing feature development and stuff is always it's its own prioritization effort inside the big prioritization effort, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we would certainly be interested to kind of see some of where there's any discrepancies in requirements between what you have and what we have, because I think that that can lead to very healthy kind of conversations for this community and future implementers as well, to start to consider as they are looking at, hey, what does a facility registry in my country look like? So yeah, I think that would be great. Well, so we have about 10 minutes. I was thinking perhaps we take the last 10 minutes to address some of the other issues that were brought up at the beginning of the call. Does that sound good to everyone?
Okay.
Before we leave the survey, I wonder if I could just say a couple of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
First of all, I apologize for not filling out the survey. My reasons were I looked at it, and being a new member of this sub-community, I honestly didn't have a lot of opinions on the things that were there. I think my interest in being a part of this community is, maybe you could say it's cross-cutting. Being involved with DHIS, I want to make sure that DHIS is a good and appropriate player in this community, and that really, concerning anything to do with facility registry functionality that DHIS has, obviously, in addition to all the rest of the things that DHIS does. So that's my basic interest, not really coming from a point of saying I have these particular priorities, but just saying how can I learn, how can DHIS be doing the right thing by the facility registry and by the OpenHIE. It's a little funny, as we all know, that DHIS is in a couple of different boxes here, and we have essentially two facility registry software systems. One is Resource Mapper, which is a more dedicated facility registry, and one is DHIS, in which that's just one of the many things DHIS does. And so, my interest is just to understand the implications of that and how best to represent the community going forward, given that situation.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's super important. I think that's it's good to have those conversations. And there's were you at the Indie meeting? No. Well, anyways, there's two things about how I think there's two angles on how to tackle that conversation. One of them is from like the OHIE architecture perspective, right? Where we have a conceptual set of building blocks that interoperate in certain ways, and each building block has a role, right, in an SOA sort of environment. And inside that OHIE architectural perspective, DHIS playing the role of the data warehouse, right, is important, and as such, it needs to be able to integrate with systems that expose the right dimensions of data and so on, right? So that's kind of like DHIS as an implementation of that data warehouse role inside the OHIE architecture. And then there's a practical country kind of reality where DHIS is also used as a system. Sometimes it is used as a data entry tool where people put in information about their facilities because they're trained to log in, and they have the forms and so on. So besides the role of DHIS and OHIE, there's like another hat, which is looking at DHIS as a widely deployed and used in multifaceted ways technology that has to somehow work with facility data and facility registry data. And that's why that the country specifics of each usage pattern and topology matters. Because if you're, for example, in some countries we were discussing with Bob before, hey, DHIS is used as a form for data entry. It doesn't make sense to train the same people to enter somewhat similar data in another form. Let's just use DHIS as a user interface, and then it captures some of this data. It can choose to keep it if it wants to, but the data of record for the facility registry is in the facility registry service because there's other people working on that data set as well. In other countries, it may well be that DHIS is also used as a place to kind of directly manage that data, in which case DHIS as a tool that chooses to fulfill that role wants to look at the requirements we identify for facility registries and fulfill them as much as possible to be able to fulfill that role well, right? Which goes beyond just forms and exposing data. There's versioning things we've identified and so on. But there's no obligation. I mean, DHIS is the self-determined product, and we as a community, we can identify a long list of requirements, and DHIS can choose not to implement them as a tool, right? I think the only kind of obligation from DHIS side comes in the other bucket when we look at DHIS within the architecture of OHIE, because as a community member and with a role there, there's a certain style of interoperability that will be expected. But then in terms of the facility registry work, there is no kind of like obligations, and we just hope that we can both have APIs in the facility reference implementation, facility registry that DHIS can consume to use that data, and also that you can learn about the requirements in such a way that if DHIS wants to be the facility registry as well, you can do so in a kind of like more competent and complete way over time. And if another party shows up and says like, hey, we're also another technology group that we either want to talk to facility registries or be a facility registry, they'll be welcome, and we will have an open discussion about their trade-offs and help them realize their destiny, and by sharing the information that we elicit from this community. Does that make sense?
I think that was very well put, Ed. That was very well put.
Thank you. And I think, Roger, is related to the question you had at the beginning. And so I think we have to put our OHIE hats at times and say, let's work out this relationship with the data warehouse and what are the APIs, and make sure that DHIS can update its reference facility list over time from a facility registry over that API. And we're going to have to work on that. And then there's other things, which is like, hey, how do we work in each country? Does that help, Jim? I mean, it's my perspective. This is a common picture. Let's all refine it so that the work is of value to everybody.
Yes, and I think that, obviously DHIS and Resource Mapper are products that are driven in user-driven directions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we need to be careful about the facility registry as part of OpenHIE, maybe a subset of what Resource Mapper does, maybe a subset of what DHIS does, but we need to see what is essential for the users that we're targeting, for the architecture that we're targeting.
Yep. And that is why the requirements process that Scott has been leading is so essential, because it kind of gives that country perspective and validation on what is that subset of features and so on. I don't know if people remember, like a year ago or more even, when we started this discussion, actually the reference implementation resource map instance that we were having was chock full of features that were not related to facility registries, and we all agreed on that. So it has, like, I think similar to like any tool these days, it has like a modular and plugin architecture, and we moved all the things that were really non-essentials to plugins, and they're not even activated in our main cloud instance to even help avoid that confusion. So I agree with that process, and we've gone through it once, and we should continue to do that. But the requirements that Scott has is kind of like our best understanding of all the people from in-country implementations and offices poking at the problem space, and like we're slowly shaping the elephant, with this collection of international blind men. And I think there's, over time, a pretty good statistical consensus on what is this thing which we call facility registry, and what are its roles and responsibilities in an ecosystem of other stuff. And so that's why I think what you were suggesting before as conversations to have, and also what Roger was describing with his diagram, was really, let's take some time to clarify and revise our definition of facility registry by looking at requirement space first, right? Is this a need? Is this something that helps with better facility data governance? And then look at what tools should or should not do, right? Again, tools could add features, could change the way the features get done and things like that accordingly. But I think the super valuable discussion is in requirement space and understanding where those things fit relative to each other.
Sounds good. Were you referring to a particular requirements document or just requirements for a country? Scott, maybe after the call is done and we're short on time, you can send out some references to all the requirement collection we've been doing, and like contrasting and juxtaposing the requirements from different countries and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think Roger, you've seen this, but I think it might also help in terms of having the dialogue around the diagram that you shared. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of like different angles, right? We have some data specification kind of work that's been done around like, hey, here's the different data elements we would like to see in a facility registry. And then we have user stories where people from different angles describe, hey, what does a facility registry accomplish, or what do I expect it to do? And so, yeah, I'm happy to share both of those. And as part of our implementation guidance, we've been trying to pull that together as, one of the core pieces of this is really where, as a community, as well as, facility registry implementers, we would advise, hey, you should start here at looking at your requirements. Yeah, so I'm happy to share that with all you guys. So, and of course, get any feedback you have if, hey, this is a requirement that maybe you're missing, or, potentially from other countries that you guys have seen, like, hey, these were requirements that they had. We'd love to start to incorporate that into our thinking as well. So I think we're running up towards the end of our time. Any follow-up questions or comments before we wrap up for today?
Nope.
Can you guys hear me? Jim?
Yeah, no, not for me.
Okay.
Not for me.
Larry, Roger, any last thoughts or questions before we close out?
No, I think it's a fine direction that we're going to move toward requirements. I guess the only sort of caveat I have is about there's a role for bringing in expertise, as it were, as well as simply a user-driven sort of approach to requirements, because some people have done this for a while and have figured out some more things that are needed in general. There's some better practices that people have discovered, and there's a role for them, even if it's beyond what our existing audience is asking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, we agree, and that's part of why the people invited to this community are who they are. We want actually, one of the things that we've bemoaned is that sometimes what happens is that a lot of data gets captured from country implementers, but a lot of quote experts are the ones on this call having to deal with it without them, the other group on the call. So
Yep.
I agree with your statement, and actually, we have to balance and actually try to create more intersections of those two here. So yeah, looking forward to your help in setting that up. Yeah.
Yeah, there haven't been any implementers on either of the two calls that I've attended so far, and that's getting the implementers on has always been tough in the open MRS space as well. So it might have to spend some thinking time on that to figure out how we can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that we've already been trying to address, and I think part of the issue that people have shared with us is that a little bit of it is like the time zone issue. We're already kind of running into 6 p.m. East Africa time, and if you're in Southeast Asia, forget about it. It's way too late. And how can we try to have topics that they're interested in, as well as two, potentially have it at times that's easy for them to connect. And I think that's something that we've been thinking about and trying to identify ways within OHIE at large, as well as within our facility registry community, we can bring more actual implementers into the community. And because I think to date, a majority of those kind of conversations happen in like ad hoc or side conversation kind of ways, as opposed to centrally here. But it's certainly something that we value quite a bit, and we want to see improve over time. So.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Larry, any closing thoughts from you, or? I think Larry might be on mute. Hold on.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I'm pushing forward my next meeting, so I'll jump off, and thank you, everybody. And Scott, let's send up those follow-up notes. I think everybody will benefit.
Yep, that sounds great. All right, thanks everyone.
Jim, Larry, and Roger. Bye.
See you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.